Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session, wherever you're joining us. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us in this 2021 C20 Summit session on zeroing in on Asia's just energy transition, organized by Fair Finance Asia together with Fair Finance Japan, Responsibank Indonesia, and Fair Finance India. My name is Bernadette Victorio. I am the program lead for Fair Finance Asia, and I have the pleasure to moderate this day's session. Before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to briefly introduce Fair Finance Asia to those of you who are hearing about us for the very first time. Fair Finance Asia is an Oxfam regional initiative committed to ensuring that financial institutions operating in the region uphold the social and environmental rights and well-being of local communities. Fair Finance Asia is supported by SIDA through the Swedish Embassy in Bangkok, Thailand. And we have national coalitions active in Cambodia, India, Indonesia, Japan, Pakistan, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. Three of them are actually here with us in this panel today, and they are all active members of the C20 from Japan, Indonesia, and India. Fair Finance coalitions leverage the Fair Finance Guides and is part of Fair Finance International, with coalitions also active in Europe and Latin America. And just to briefly introduce today's session, with the successive G20 presidencies of Indonesia and India coming up in 2022 and 2023, respectively, there's great anticipation as well as expectation among civil society organizations from Asia on how the just energy transition will be prioritized. Many thought leaders call Asia as a key battleground for sustainable energy transition, and rightfully so, being home to billions of populations still reliant on coal as one of the primary sources of energy, also home to some of the most influential financiers of the industry. According to the Global Coal Exit List, only in the period between January 2016 to December 2020, financial institutions operating in Asia provided 1.5 trillion US dollars in loans and underwriting services to companies engaged in coal mining and coal-fired power plants in Asia. While we are seeing hopeful signs of commitments by Asian governments and net zero targets set by G20 countries such as China, Japan, and South Korea, as well as many other Asian financial institutions and companies already following suit by phasing out new coal projects and making climate pledges, there's still much work to be done, especially to support the developing countries in the region to move forward as well. And because it is critical that the G20, especially the members, demonstrate a stronger leadership in demanding accountability and concrete and time-bound actions by the financial sector operating in Asia and globally to phase out lending or investing in fossil fuel companies and diverting the much-needed finance towards renewable sources of energy, we hope that this session could, in a way, amplify the call to urgent action. And therefore, the main goal of this session is really to highlight the need to prioritize just energy transition in Asia and the role of the financial sector in developing strategic pathways that address the critical social and environmental impacts of such transition. Now, to further elaborate on those points and to join me in today's discussions, please join me in welcoming our panelists for today. First of all, we have Mr. Yuki Tanabe, representing Japan Center for Sustainable Environment and Society, JAXUS, who's also the coordinator of Fair Finance Japan and the Infrastructure Working Group coordinator during the C20 in 2019 in Japan. We also have Herni Ramlaningrum from Prakarsa, Indonesia, also the coordinator of Responsibank Indonesia, and incoming working group coordinator of the Finance and Taxation Working Group, the C20 Indonesia in 2022. And we also have Mr. Sridhar Ramamurthy from Environics Trust India, which is a member of Fair Finance India. Welcome to the panelists, and very glad to have you all in the panel today. Let's get on to it. The first question being, what do you think is the most important role that G20 countries play in facilitating Asia's just energy transition? And maybe I can start with Yuki. Please.
Oh, hello everyone. I'm Yuki Tanabe. I work for Justice. I'm watching Japanese finance for fossil fuel project. So the key question is how G20 countries make a roadmap to make their public finance in line with the Paris Agreement goals. So especially the IEA, International Energy Agency, published a roadmap towards the net zero goal by 2050 recently, and they said that the public and private financing has to be phased out for the public financing and the private financing for fossil fuels has to be phased out quickly. And so that's especially at the G20 Summit this year. The key agenda is whether they can end public financing for new coal-fired power project. That is a key agenda at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuki. Pernie?
Yeah, thank you, Bea. So as we all have known, Indonesia will be the chair of the G20 presidency next year. Yeah, and this position is definitely strategic. Indonesia, with the theme of the recover stronger, recover together, so as to revive from COVID-19. And then the year of 2022 will be the right momentum for Indonesia to influence and promote green recovery, strengthen national and regional economy, and ensure long-term implementation of social and environmental sustainability. I think the role of Indonesia has been seen and started during the ministerial meeting of G20 in Japan, where Indonesia, represented by the Minister of Environment and Forestry, proposed the strategic action, including selecting biofuels as one of the energy innovation, as well as bioenergy as part of the renewable energy and energy transition for the various uses, especially for the power generation and transportation. And second proposal from the Indonesia government was to incorporate affordability aspect in energy efficiency and power system, and promoting clean and affordable energy access as a separate part. I think currently Indonesia also finalizing the preparation of the National Energy Grand Strategy with two important agenda, including reducing carbon emission and how to gradually reduce the usage of the fossil fuels in terms of the energy transition. So yeah, hopefully Indonesia will be further increase its commitment on energy transition internally, and this can be brought as a role model as the G20 presidency. Thank you, Bea.
Thank you, Pernie. Sridhar?
Yeah, I think G20 has a very important role, especially in the current context when the IPCC report has come in, and even 1.5 is going to be very dangerous. The G20 can, even within the G20, I think the G7 has a lot to do with what kind of transition takes place, and particularly how decentralized people-owned power systems can be created. Also, what we are finding is that in the last 75 years of this kind of an economy, money actually doesn't reach the last mile. So I think in the context of climate change and in the context of G20, post-pandemic, I think it should seriously look at how to, get over the legacy polluting industry like coal and other fossil fuel. How do we transit from it? And also we have to look at how money actually reaches the people who are affected and more as reparation, not as new fresh loans on the poor.
Thank you so much. So if I understand correctly from what the three of you have mentioned, it's basically you are saying that many of the G20 countries, especially the ones with the most influence, have the capability or the influence to actually phase out from fossil fuels by setting examples as what Hernie said, but also as Sridhar referred to, by actually really moving capital and finance towards those industries that support that transition. And because of that, then my next question would be, arguably, you could say that China is probably one of the most influential movers for this change that could happen within the G20 as a member of the G20. And definitely its current announcement of not anymore financing overseas coal is something that is really welcome, and we are looking forward to really seeing the impacts of that. How do you then see this new commitment from China impacting other G20 countries, NDCs, target setting, or coal financing, particularly from countries that you refer to also as Sridhar, the G7 especially. So they are also very influential here. Maybe I start with you, Sridhar, because you had the last point.
I think one is, I think most of what China has invested in coal and fossil fuels has been in the last decade. So definitely this will continue. The impacts of this is going to continue for next 2-3 decades, even if no new investment comes in. But I think at least for some of us, we have to take this very cautiously, because how it plays out on the ground in terms of, even we know that there are ongoing projects with Chinese investment in India on the power sector. So we should look at it more carefully. Second is that, how do we set standards even for transition? Because if today it has been happening with coal mining or the places where coal-fired power plants are there, if lithium mining or mining for heavy metals also causes the same kind of human rights violations, then we are not in the right direction. So the transition has to be very cautious, and I think the Chinese, announcement that it will not invest in coal is welcome, but I think we need to go many more steps beyond it in terms of how how equitable it is, because we are also seeing that the world is becoming a more and more inequitable place.
Thanks, Sridhar. And that's really an important point, because what I failed to mention before was that China committed not to finance new coal-fired power plants, but then we are not talking about, as you say, the ones that are already in process and are still there. So, and you also raised a very important point regarding the emerging issues that we should be looking at in terms of the just transition. But before I go there, Yuki, do you want to add on to that point, given that Japan also sets some targets, but many commentators and civil society are saying it's not nearly ambitious enough. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, as a G7 member, Japan also committed to end coal financing by this year. But Japan said that they will stop the new finance for coal projects. So the Japanese government is now preparing for 2 coal-fired projects. One is in Indonesia and the other is Bangladesh. So these coal power projects are not new, as Japanese government said that. So the commitment is the good, but still the implementation is not so good at the moment. And in addition to that, I think that after the Chinese commitment, so there are many positive movement around the ending coal finance. So during the G20 Energy Minister meeting in July, China, India, Russia, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia protested against ending coal support. But after that, Turkey also committed to adopt the Paris Agreement finally. And India also member of Quad member, and India and Australia committed to cooperate with US and Japan. And so that it's a good movement around at the moment. So on the ending coal financing.
Sure. So if anything, this is creating a sort of pressure from countries to declare new targets and set more ambitious targets than the last one being set. So that's really, in a way, very important. But I would like to pick up on a point that Sridhar mentions in his intervention with regards to really ensuring that the just transition is actually happening in a just manner. And here we already, as civil society, are very much aware of the rising human rights violations in the metal mining industry, the exploration of deep sea mining, which will be really, really harmful in search for all these new minerals that are important to power the sustainable energy transition. And I see heads nodding here. So I'm very interested to hear you all weigh on this as civil society, really. How do we ensure that, we are also balancing the way that we call out for the move to just energy transition, but also to ensure that that move is really moving in a manner that is taking into account all these potential issues. Hernie, maybe I could start with you on that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, thank you, Bea. Okay, picking up from your question, I think I will be starting from the idea of the importance of the civil society organization, in contributing to the in raising the issues to support the transition. And we all have known that the energy transition cannot take place without the support of the stakeholders, including the CSOs, including Fair Finance Asia and also Responsive Bank Indonesia, have been doing a lot of jobs in terms to conduct advocacy based on evidence from the meticulous research that we have conducted for years. And I think the result from the CSOs, from the study and the advocacy work can be fundamentally integrated into all the decision-making process from the outset. And then from the Responsive Bank Indonesia, from the several case studies in the palm oil sectors and also in the cement mountain in Indonesia, we have seen how actually this sector have been damaged, not only environment, but also socio and economic of the communities. And I think the process of the G20, in particularly the next year for Indonesia, is very crucial also for us as the Responsive Bank, because we are part of the C20, and then we are promoting the issues at the level of how to putting pressure on the incumbent policies, the legitimate current structure, and facilitate new institution and shape discourses among the CSOs that we deliver to the Sherpa or to the G20 of Indonesia. We are also strengthen the landscape level by shaping values, on the environmental values, and build international solidarity and social justice by bringing our case study to our network at the FFA and FGA to have further response from the responsible actors. So I think that's from me. Thank you, Bea.
Thanks, Hernie. Sridhar, would you like to then comment on that, since you also raised that important point?
Yeah, I think one is, how local communities where mining and these activities are going to take place, how they are going to be given the primacy in participation. I think that is going to be important. And as CSOs, as Hernie rightly pointed out, how do we, kind of look at evidence for, and proper due diligence, when activities take place. I think this is going to be important. And what we are finding is all windfall profits go to the company, and losses and pollution come to the communities. I think this has to be reversed. That where the communities are economically gaining, and they are able to control how the actual environmental condition on the ground is managed.
Mm-hmm. But before I move on to Yuki and Sridhar, because I know that you also work a lot with multilateral development banks, and you're monitoring also their activities, and obviously a lot of majority of the G20 countries are either members or investors in these multilateral development banks. So how do you see their role in ensuring that this transition is in fact happening in a just manner, especially now we have just seen the ADB energy policy being consulted among civil society, and we had just commented on it. So maybe you could add more onto that.
Yeah, I think the multilateral development banks, and now that we have a couple of more new banks like AIB and the New Development Bank, they become important because almost in all countries, they kind of lay the foundation for policies and changes. And also, what we are finding is over the years, these multilateral development banks are hiding behind country priorities, or what they are calling as country strategy papers or country strategy reports. So I think now, is a time where it's kind of a pincer moment. We need to pressure the multilateral development banks and also within the countries to be able to say that, what is priority of people may not be the priority of the government. So how priorities of the people are put in front. And if you see, for instance, you have the ADB policy, sometimes, at least at a personal level, I think policies must have clearly articulated principles and maybe must be short. For instance, the ADB new draft policy is 44 pages of lot of things that only hide that its intentions, rather than telling very clearly that one, it will not fund coal, or two, it will enable reparations for past ecological damage, or enable more money to reach poor, or work on decentralized energy. Such clear-cut things are not there. I think we need to demand for that.
Thank you. Yuki, please go ahead.
Yeah, and the World Bank said that in order to achieve the transitions, 500% production of some minerals are needed. So that's why, therefore, the human rights impact and the environment impact, the pressure for these impact are very increased dramatically. So the both mining company and the financial institutions have to strengthen the standard, environmental human rights standard, and have to strengthen their due diligence on the environment social impact at the beginning. And then the civil society, especially who is working on the, who is watching the project and watching the environment and the human rights impact as a watchdog. Yeah, these roles are very become more important, more and more important.
Thank you, Yuki. Absolutely. I think the role of the civil society is very, very important to track, not only whether these commitments are happening in a timely manner and being delivered by the country, according to their pledges, but also to see how the whole transition process is actually unfolding. And I think the question here then is maybe something now that I pick up from this discussion, because again, Sridhar also mentioned this a while ago, and Yuki, you alluded to this about the transition. So we are looking at this transition process, and we know that there are already timelines and milestones that are available there based on the studies such as the International Energy Association net zero by 2050 study, and there's also new reports coming out from IPCC showing us the new science and what that means for the transition really to move more swiftly. But when we talk about transition, what does that really mean to you as civil society? What are the things that civil society watchdogs should be looking out for? What do we want to hear from countries when they set these targets and commitments and they talk about transition? And what specifically are the specific targets that need to be clearly laid out, particularly when saying, we are transitioning justly in Asia. What does that mean to you? And Hernie, I see you nodding your head, so maybe I start with you.
Okay, Bea. So for us, the transition mean in Indonesia is that there are a lot of homework that the Indonesian government need to solve. And then this should be started from the domestic context, in which how Indonesia ensuring our strong commitment, their strong commitment and policies. Unfortunately, apart from what I have said previously, some of the proposal and then action that has been proposed by the Indonesian government in the ministerial meeting, there are still some concerns that need to be addressed in the national level. For instance, in the national midterm development plan, the CSOs have seen that the electricity is being discussed in that national midterm development plan, but it is not clear what resource it has strayed from. And then in addition, the draft on law on new and renewable energy is not yet been ratified until now. And that is, the two instruments are very crucial. And then the CSOs want the government to accelerate in passing the bills, and then to ensure that the real and the concrete strategy on how the transition of energy can be done in Indonesia, because the national midterm development plan didn't mention anything clearly about that. And then we also want to see how, as the CSO, we also want to support the government on how to solve the existing issues, including at the moment, how the government deal with the consequences of the large number of contracts, especially those attached to the PLN, the national electric companies, and because there are some contracts that stated the agreement will be operated until the next 20 years, and then this huge contract can hamper the process of the energy transition, and also the non-renewable such as coal will eventually become stranded asset if the government really commit to moving toward to the energy transition. And this is also the thing that the CSOs want to involve in the discussion with the government. And then another thing is that the transformation toward the low carbon development has its limitation, especially the suppliers in the business sector have been given some kind of leeway, even with the carbon tax, because the carbon tax is being discussed at the moment in the parliament with the very low price. And then these policies will certainly will not encourage the changing of behavior of the corporate. They will still think that the brown sector is still promising, and they want to stay in that sector. And also one more thing, if we are seeing the phase out of the coal, it has to be seen within the framework of political economy. Yeah, formally there seem to be coherent framework. It seems like we have the coherent framework, but in the reality, there are so many paradox regulation we have, including the matter of royalty exemption. And then the CSOs want to encourage and they want to participate on this current momentum. We should utilize the momentum where the coal price is high. Then we supposedly move to more ambitious on the new renewable energy. And as the C20, we want to Indonesia government, this G20 member, to call all the G20 members to have more ambitious renewable energy. And as part the as we remember that contribution from the G20 on global emission reached 75%. So yeah, I think Indonesia has this mandate, and the CSO in Indonesia will also support this. Back to you, Bea.
Very good. Thank you. And I will pick up again on those points, especially when we talk more about the policy asks coming into the C20 Indonesia in 2022. But maybe I want to hear also from Yuki and Sridhar. Sridhar, you want to respond to this as well?
Yeah. Essentially, in our conception, just transition is an opportunity to correct the historical injustices of the past. When we look at the climate crisis today, 200 years and more closely in the last 40, 50 years, how rich nations have used, rich people and poor nations have used, have been the cause of this problem. And therefore, this just transition is an opportunity to correct these historical injustices, which means that we need new forms of ownership. We need new forms of how energy will be generated and used, especially how do we focus on the end use of energy, what are the sources and how the end use can be. Also, what we think is while doing this, we also have to call off on this all the false solutions which are going to take away a lot of money, whether it is carbon capture and storage, whether it is the large scale solar ray interventions, all these kind of things where a lot of resources will go, which will not be of benefit to the poor. So I think just transition to us is an opportunity to correct historical injustices and set in motion new forms of economy.
Yes, but Sridhar, I think just to your point also there, electricity for all, this is now what people are discussing because of potential energy poverty that could result from ineffective transition measures. Wouldn't that be also for the poor? Obviously, we want to ensure that the populations in the region in Asia that are still highly dependent on coal.
Yeah, sorry, Bea.
Sure.
This is a standard argument where we hide behind the poor. If you look at even my country, the amount of electricity that is required to reach the last person is very little as compared to the total amount of energy. For instance, in India, we have 40 gigawatts of stranded power, right? But we are not reaching the people who need power. So our mismanagement of electricity processes in our countries by national electric authorities cannot be a reason why we push this same kind of models ahead. And this has been a standard argument for the last decade. And every time a new power project is added, for instance, in Bangladesh, the power this thing is more than what is adequately needed in the country. But whether the poor can afford that power is a different ball game altogether.
Thanks, Ridhar, for clarifying that point. And now I look at Yuki, because now we are talking about transition in the sense of, creating more efficiencies in the way that we transfer energy, move the innovation, which is probably something that the Japanese are also very interested in. Yuki.
Yeah, there can be many conflicts. For example, can we use the fossil fuels or renewables? And can we use the electricity for cities and industries, or energy access for rural area? Or so how many, the energy renewable development, or the minerals resources pressure. So there are many conflicts in the transition. So I think the most important is the transparency and participation, and especially transparency on energy development data, and so transparency on the individual project and the environmental impact and social impact data. So, and the participation, especially for affected people's participation. So it's not only the transition, but it's a key element for sustainable development. But it's also applicable for energy transition.
Thank you. And I think I hear very recurring points from all three of you that responded to this, obviously the transparency angle, which Hernie also mentioned, which is citing the case of Indonesia, equality, redressing the issues of inequalities through this transition, as Sridhar mentioned, and Yuki, your point on participation and ensuring that really the communities that are highly affected by the transition are taken into account, in these discussions. And this is exactly why I think we wanted to organize this session. And also one of the important discussions that we want to also take forward and raise, even with the Indonesian C20 discussions next year, Hernie, as you also referred to, because yes, we are talking about, climate finance pledges from developed countries. We are talking about, potential regulation of the financial sector to ensure that there is really a phase out of fossil finance, and that money is moving towards funding renewable energy. But I think more importantly, we want to ensure that through all these processes, the social impacts are taken into account. And I think in many regions, including in Europe, where they are starting to talk about social taxonomy. And in Asia, for us, this is really, really important, how to take into account the likely impact of the transition to the poor that are also still dependent on those industries, and how we can move them forward, reskill them, to move towards the new technologies and innovation for sustainable just transition of energy. And with that, maybe I ask Hernie to talk a little bit more with this, connecting to what you plan to do and what civil society in Indonesia plan to really use this as a basis for calling out urgent discussions on this and C20 in 2022.
Mm. Yeah, Bea. So in the last 4 months, yeah, the CSOs that gather in the C20 have been asked about several questions, yeah, including how the government of Indonesia underscores the balance between emission reduction and the economic growth as part of achieving Indonesia's low carbon development vision by 2045. And then another question during the discussion also, how strong climate ambition and energy transition will expedite the process of achieving the Indonesia vision and greening the economic recovery. These 2 points are very important. The 2 questions are very important because we, on the other side, we want to make sure that the government commit on how to take an action on the climate ambition. But on the other hand, we also want to make sure that the process of the transition will not disadvantage the more vulnerable group. But we also not to forget, yeah, in the discourses of the climate delay, we often heard about the appeal to social justice, where some of groups will explain that the climate actions will generate large costs and the vulnerable member will be more vulnerable. So this is actually just the excuse that being, raised by some groups to delay the climate action, yeah. And then under the Indonesia presidency, the C20 working group, in particularly the Energy Transition and Climate Sustainability Working Group and the Taxation and Sustainable Financial Working Group, continue to promote the green economic recovery, energy transition, climate justice, and clean energy access for all, including for the women. Therefore, we bring 4 key priorities to be discussed with the G20 and also with the Sherpa in several meetings. These 4 are fostering the implementation of the green economic recovery in advancing climate resilience and mitigating the climate change. The second one is to call as stranded asset, that is potential climate-related transition risk and its financial impact to banking sector. The third one is enforcing carbon tax regulation that clearly support emission reduction with rational price, of course, not like the current price that Parliament discussed, and also accelerating gender and social inclusion as a way to support just transition in achieving climate resilience. And then for the call as stranded asset, yeah, the way forward that should be undertaken to circumvent the stranded asset and then the future potential stranded asset and financial instability by the government is that we want to propose to the government, central bank, and the financial regulator, and also financial institution, yeah. To the government, we want the government to provide clear signal in implementing climate change policies. For example, in the term of the determining emissions peak, planning additional coal-fired power plant. So what is the plan for the coal-fired power plant? And then how the government going to to have the coal phase-out strategy? And also the last thing is we want to see the government to have the policies in implementing the carbon economic values or carbon tax instrument. For the central bank and financial sector, the CSOs demand them to conduct research on financial climate risk and low carbon macroeconomic modeling recommendation, and also issue several policies to boost investment in green project with ESG assessment criteria. And for the financial institution, as the CSOs, we want them to provide reporting on climate risk and investment, as well as investment management and portfolio, investment allocation with green index, and stress testing of investment risk. And yeah, so I think that is one proposal that I need to emphasize, including the gender inclusion in energy access and climate justice. This point is we want to ensuring the inclusiveness of the perspective of gender equality and social inclusion in the every renewable energy policies and program. In many places, outer islands of Java, we've seen that small islands are actually have no access to the energy. They have no electricity and etc. And the impact of the situation is worsening to the women group. And then that's why we want to ensure the access, participation, and also control by women and marginalized group as part of the planning and implementation process for whoever come to the area. Back to you, Bea. I hope that answer your questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those very clear points and actually very hopeful objectives already that we are seeing from initial discussions from the Sherpa and G20 Indonesia. So definitely there's a lot of things to look out for. I'm particularly interested around the discussion of the regulations that the Indonesian presidency would be proposing around the phase out of coal financing. Particularly, this is important, for us in the region, especially many countries around the region are already starting to create a certain framework, some sort of policies, and this is indeed needing to be coordinated, across the region. And if there is a clear leadership coming from the G20 through the Indonesian presidency, that would be really good. And then also, if we are really pushing this also to see, more impact on the women, as you highlighted rightfully, the gendered impacts of power poverty, energy poverty on women in rural areas, this is really important. Now, I see some questions coming from the chat, and we don't have a lot of time, but let's tackle this one. What do you think are the important steps to enhance the transparency for developing countries, as many countries are faced with technical and capacity challenges? So I suppose this is referring to, transparency in looking at these commitments and pledges and tracking these transition finance as we talked about. So, Yuki, do you want to speak to this point?
I don't have any experience engaged with the government, developing countries' government, but as a government and Japanese public finance and private finance institutions to disclose the environment and the social impact. So we urge them to establish and strengthen of social and environment guidelines and standards. So then they have improved. So and we also push in during the individual project consideration by them. So we push them to disclose the impact and mitigation measures. So that's, so maybe Henry or Sudha can speak about how to strengthen in developing countries.
That could fall also with the mandatory regulations potentially to call for mandatory disclosures of these environmental impacts that could come from the Indonesian presidency discussion. That could be very well there. Anyone else want to respond to this question? Sridhar or Herni, very quickly.
Yeah.
Sridhar?
Yeah. Essentially, I think transparency is the fundamental, foundation for anything. And what we are saying is, for instance, in several countries there are now laws on right to information. So, what information can be obtained, or by a parliamentarian, or by asking the government? We are saying those must be disclosed openly on the websites. Today, digital platforms are available to inform. Though, many of the multilateral development banks and others put it up, I think they need to put it before the project so that the quality of intake of projects are better, because we are getting information after the impact is over. So, like for instance, Hernie pointed out to impacts on women. But if these are known upfront before the project comes, then the community can be forewarned and can take steps adequately.
Thank you. Yes, Hernie, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'd like to add one point from what Shreddad has explained. I think the sharing information among developing countries is also important, because as the developing country, we are mostly the countries where all the money comes illegally and then the money is out illegally, and then we don't really talk each other. And then I think the digital platform that Shreddad explained can also be utilized on how these among developing countries start to open their financial report and how the business sector are actually operated among the countries.
Thank you, Hernie. And I think that's a very important point in terms of collaboration, sharing, coordination between civil society organizations, and also at the level of financial and regulatory policy making as well. Because it's important for us to definitely track these financial flows, to share the information that we have globally, regionally, and this is really important for us to ensure that the commitments and the pledges of countries and financial institution, financial sector, are really tracked. Since we are running out of time, so I think let's have one round of just final statements. So since we are all civil society here talking about calling for just transition in the region, very quickly, just one liner. What do you think are the important role that civil society can play in calling for urgent action in the just transition, particularly in the topics that we have discussed today, calling for more transparency and accountability, calling for more mandatory regulations, and really ensuring that there is greater transparency, that the just transition is happening in a just manner. So where are the important contributions you see for the civil society in these very short statements? Let me start with Hernie, please.
Okay, Bea, I think I have slightly mentioned about what are the contribution of the CSOs in terms of the energy transition. So for us, am I going to repeat what I have said before, that for Responsive Bank Indonesia, we are going to take a role in the three levels. First is at the level of creating new socio-technical niche. We want to call that experimentation, innovation, market development, and learning across the countries is very important. And us as the CSOs want to have this transfer of the knowledge and technology from the developed country who have been successfully move toward the energy transition to the developing countries. And the second is at the level of the regimes. We want to keep putting pressure on the current policies, delegitimate the current structure, and then facilitate the new institution and shaping the discourses in the business sector, in the financial sector. We have been working to advocate the OJK, even though it's the challenges are there, but then we believe that some of the new regulation that released by the government is also coming from our pressure from the Responsive Bank and also other CSOs. And the third one is that at the landscape level, we want to continue to shaping the values on the environmental values, to build international solidarity and social justice, and to ensure that the participation and the democracy process is being used in the process of the energy transition, involving all the stakeholders, and then creating the coherence policies. So all the ministers, all the ministries have coherence and inline policies, not like one going to the transition, but the other one they go to the how to keep the status quo. They're keeping the status quo of the brown sector. So I think that's what we want to do, and then what we have done so far. Thank you, Bea.
Thank you, Hernie. Sridhar, very short.
Yeah, I think 2-3 things. One is how do we push money in the right direction. Second is, how do we, like Ernie also pointed out, how do we get right technologies, right techniques? The third is, how do we ensure complete transparency in the entire process? I think these are going to be most important.
Wonderful. And I will end with Yuki because I know Yuki will be the short. Go ahead.
Yeah, we will watch the G20's fossil fuel financing, and we will watch the end at the end of this month. There will be a G20 ministerial the head of meeting just before COP26. So I hope the good impact will be happen. So, and also we will watch the impact, social and the environmental impact of metal mining project. So, which is the both ends of the energy transitions. Yeah.
Thank you, Yuki. And on that note, Fair Finance Asia is actually coming out with just energy transition study in time for the COP26 next month. So please continue to follow us, via Twitter, our website, also www.fairfinance.asia.com. And we are happy to share with other civil society organizations in Asia and beyond the findings of our study, and to collaborate with many of you who we are aware are also very interested in this topic, and looking forward to further collaboration on that. And we will definitely continue tracking these discussions, which we have started. I'm not going to try to make a summary of the great discussion that happened, but I think the important points that were raised today really to ensure that there is greater transparency, equality, and participation in the way that the just energy transition in the region is conducted, and that there is really a call for financial institutions to create more transparency in the way that they report their social environmental impacts, and a call to the financial regulators and policymakers to have more mandatory regulations to ensure that there is really a stop to the coal financing and moving finance more towards the renewable energy transition. And finally, to ensure that the G20, and particularly the G7, continues its leadership in discussing these issues and around climate finance, and creating greater leadership around this space, and ensuring that civil society organizations are part of that discussion, because are the organizations also representing the interests of many of the local communities that we are working with. And having said that, we are now on time to end this session. Thank you so much for those of you that joined. We hope that you picked up some good points from this discussion. Please contact us if you would like to work together. And thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you,
very
Bea.
much. Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you to all
Bye-bye.
the participants. Thank you, Bia. Thank you, Ernie and Yuki.
Thank
Yes,
you,
thank you.
Sadat. You